Upe curi chi campa e chi tu chi guarda lupo mentre dormi, e l'ospiti ti sono lo pane di casa mangia cinire all'alba. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome back.
What is that? Is that real?
She was just the girl who poured the wine. Nothing more. Nothing worth noticing. At least, that was the lie Isabella Varelli had perfected. She stood near the edge of the dining floor at La Waitress, her fingers wrapped tightly around a crystal water jug that cost more than her monthly rent. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her head low, eyes trained on the polished marble tiles beneath her feet. If anyone looked closely, they would see fear written into the small movements of her body, the shallow breaths, the stiff shoulders, the way she flinched at sudden sounds. Isabella had learned a long time ago that survival depended on one thing: invisibility. If people didn't see you, they couldn't remember you. If they couldn't remember you, they couldn't hunt you. La Waitress was not a normal restaurant. It was a temple of power hidden behind warm lighting and soft music. Politicians, financiers, and men whose names never appeared in headlines came here to eat imported truffles and drink wine older than most marriages. Deals were made in murmurs. Futures were rewritten between courses. Tonight the air felt wrong. Heavy. Sure. Waiting. The kitchen staff had been restless since late afternoon. Chefs who usually shouted were quiet. Plates that were normally slammed onto counters were placed gently, carefully, as if the walls themselves were listening. "The VIP mezzanine is being cleared," whispered Ethan, one of the junior servers, as he rushed past Isabella with a tray of glasses. His face was pale. All of it. Isabella's stomach tightened. Clearing the mezzanine meant only one thing: someone dangerous was coming. Isabella. The snap of fingers jolted her. Mr. Caldwell, the floor manager, stood inches from her face. He smelled of old coffee and stress. Sweat darkened the collar of his expensive shirt. "Table service is behind," he hissed. "You're on water and wine tonight. Don't mess it up." "Yes, sir," Isabella whispered. She kept her voice soft, almost fragile, and lowered her gaze. That was the role. The frightened girl. The nobody. Then the front doors opened. Conversation died instantly. It wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, no raised voice. The silence simply fell, heavy and complete, like a blanket thrown over the room. For men entered first. They were dressed in tailored black suits, but nothing about them said business. Their eyes scanned the room with cold precision, their hands resting just a little too close to their jackets. Men like these didn't protect wealth. They enforced power. Behind them walked Lorenzo De Luca. Isabella risked a glance through her lashes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with calm confidence. His charcoal suit fit him perfectly, and his dark hair was slicked back neatly. His face was sharp, controlled, and unreadable, handsome in a way that felt dangerous rather than comforting. This was not the man who made the room freeze. That man arrived a few seconds later. Don Antonio De Luca. He moved slowly, leaning on a black cane with a silver lion's head. A long coat hung from his shoulders, and a fedora shaded eyes that had seen too much blood to ever soften. Deep lines carved his face, and scars told stories no one dared ask about. The temperature in La Waitress seemed to drop. Forks paused midair. Glasses hovered inches from lips. No one spoke. Mr. Caldwell hurried forward, bowing slightly. "Welcome, Don De Luca. It's an honor." Lorenzo lifted a hand. "The table?" he said calmly. "Yes, of course." As the De Luca syndicate moved toward the mezzanine, the staff lined up near the stairs, heads lowered. Isabella took her place at the far end, heart pounding hard enough that she feared someone might hear it. "Don't look up. Don't breathe too loud. Don't exist." The procession passed until it didn't. Don Antonio stopped. His cane tapped once against the floor. "This one," he said, his voice rough and deep. "She's shaking." Isabella felt the words like a hand closing around her throat. Lorenzo sighed. "Papa, she's just nervous." "Fear is honest," Don Antonio replied. He tapped the tip of his cane lightly against Isabella's shoe. "Look at me, girl." Isabella lifted her head slowly. She widened her eyes, let her lower lip tremble. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "I've never served people like you before." Don Antonio studied her closely. His gaze felt heavy, searching. For one terrifying second, Isabella thought he could see straight through her uniform, through the years of hiding, through the blood she carried. Then he chuckled. "Bring the wine," he said. "And don't drop it." The moment passed. Isabella exhaled shakily as they moved on. Wine service began. Isabella approached the table with careful steps, holding the bottle like it might explode. Her hands shook, until the corkscrew touched the glass. Then the shaking stopped. Her movements became smooth, precise. The cork released with a soft pop. The pour was flawless. Lorenzo noticed. Interesting. Don Antonio swirled the wine, sniffed it, then looked up at her. "You're Italian?" he asked in English. "My grandmother," Isabella said softly. "From where?" "Naples." Don Antonio waved a dismissive hand. "Noisy people." Isabella's jaw tightened, just a fraction. Then Don Antonio leaned back and spoke again, this time in a thick ancient Sicilian mountain dialect. A dialect not meant for outsiders. A language used to test, to trap. He said something crude. Insulting. Violent. The guard smiled. Lorenzo stiffened. "Papa." Isabella stopped moving. The tray pressed against her chest as she turned slowly to face Don Antonio. The fear vanished from her eyes. Her posture changed. Her chin lifted. And in the same ancient dialect, perfect, rhythmic, deadly, she spoke. A proverb. A warning. A sentence of judgment. The room froze. A fork clattered to the floor. Hands slipped inside jackets. Don Antonio stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "Who are you?" he whispered. Reality crashed back into Isabella all at once. "What have I done?" I need the kitchen," she gasped. She ran. Not a fast walk. A sprint. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Don Antonio slammed his cane against the table. "Get her." Lorenzo was already moving. He broke from formation, vaulted the railing, and chased her through the kitchen doors. His mind racing, his instincts screaming one thing over and over. That girl was no nobody. And the moment she spoke, the world had changed. Isabella ran like the walls of the restaurant were on fire. She burst through the kitchen doors, nearly colliding with a dishwasher pushing a cart of steaming plates. Someone shouted her name. Someone else cursed. A pan clattered to the floor. The sound followed her like a stampede, but Isabella didn't stop to explain. She didn't slow down. She didn't look back. Her feet moved on pure instinct. The back hallway of La Vetra was narrow, lit by harsh white bulbs that made everything look sickly and exposed. Isabella sprinted past the staff lockers, past the storage room, past the manager's office. She shoved through a swinging metal door and hit the back exit so hard it slammed open and banged against the brick wall outside. Cold rain slapped her face. The alley behind La Vetra smelled like wet trash, spilled beer and city dirt. The ground was slick. Her shoes slid for a second and her heart jumped, but she caught herself and kept moving. Her lungs burned. Her thoughts screamed. Stupid. 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 She had promised herself she would never speak that dialect again. Not even in her dreams. Not even alone in a room with the lights off. Because language was memory and memory was dangerous. It pulled you backward into old streets and old blood. But she had heard him say it. The exact words. The exact dirty phrasing. And something inside her had snapped. Now she was exposed. She was visible. And visibility for her was a death sentence. Isabella reached the end of the alley and turned sharply onto the street, blending into the blur of umbrellas and headlights. The city was loud again out here. Horns, voices, rain hitting metal. Normal life. Busy life. People rushing with groceries, people laughing under awnings, couples dragging each other through puddles. None of them knew what had just happened a few yards behind them. None of them knew she was being hunted. She cut left toward the corner, then right into another narrow passage between buildings. She moved fast but not wild. Panic tried to take control, but she forced it down. Breathe. Think. Move smart. She'd been trained for this kind of escape even before she understood what training was. Not formal training with instructors and gyms. Something colder. Lessons taught in whispers. Warnings given without kindness. She didn't run in a straight line. She never ran in a straight line. Isabella doubled back through a service entrance, crossed a loading bay, then slipped out onto a sidewalk 2 blocks away. She didn't stop. She didn't check behind her. She just kept walking fast as if she was late to somewhere normal. But inside her chest, her heart was pounding like a fist against a locked door. Then she heard footsteps. Not random. Not casual. Fast. Determined. Closing the distance. Isabella's stomach dropped. She ducked into a small side street lined with trash bins and metal fire doors, hoping to disappear again. She pressed her back against a brick wall, swallowed hard, and tried to quiet her breathing. The footsteps entered the street. A tall shadow appeared under the weak glow of a street lamp. Lorenzo De Luca. He was alone. No guards. No team. No shouting. Just him, soaked in rain, suit darkened by water, hair no longer slick and perfect. His expression was tight, controlled, but his eyes were sharp, searching her like a man who couldn't decide whether he'd found trouble or truth. Isabella held her breath. Lorenzo took one slow step forward, hands open at his sides to show he wasn't reaching for anything. "Stop running," he said. Isabella didn't answer. She kept her back against the wall, kept her hands visible, kept her face blank like the frightened waitress again. But the act felt thin now. Weak. Torn open. "You spoke," Lorenzo continued. "You spoke to my father in a dialect nobody in this city should know." Isabella lifted her shoulders slightly, pretending confusion. I don't know what you mean." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me." His voice wasn't loud. That made it worse. A calm voice from a dangerous man was more frightening than shouting. Isabella forced herself to breathe slowly. Her fingers itched. Not for a weapon. For movement. For escape. For control. Lorenzo moved closer, stopping a few feet away. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, as if the words were something he didn't say often. Isabella let out a short, bitter laugh before she could stop it. It came out harsh and small. "Of course you're not," she said, her voice low. "You're a DeLuca. You don't hurt people yourself. You let others do it for you." Lorenzo stared at her like she'd slapped him. "You know who I am," he said slowly. Isabella's pulse jumped. She hadn't meant to reveal that so clearly. She had meant to keep everything wrapped tight. Hidden. But his face, his voice, his presence had dragged the truth closer to the surface. "You're Lorenzo DeLuca," she said. "You're not a rumor. You're not a myth. You're real. And if you're standing here alone, it means you're either reckless or curious." Lorenzo didn't deny it. His eyes stayed fixed on her. "Who are you?" Isabella swallowed. Her throat felt dry even in the rain. She couldn't answer that question. Not out loud. Not to him. Not here. So she did the only thing she could do. She gave him enough truth to scare him, without giving him the full key. "You should go back," she said. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving until you tell me what that was. What you said to him." Isabella's eyes flashed. "What I said to him was a mistake." "A mistake," Lorenzo repeated. Isabella's voice sharpened. "Yes. A mistake that can get you killed too if you keep standing here asking questions." Lorenzo paused, confusion flickering across his face. Isabella took one step forward, just enough to make the air between them feel smaller. "Listen to me," she said, her voice urgent now, the panic slipping through. "Your father is not like you. He doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive. And if he finds out the truth, if he learns who I really am, he won't just come for me." Lorenzo's expression hardened. "He'll come for anyone who threatens him." "No," Isabella said, shaking her head. "You don't understand. He'll burn everything. He'll start a war he can't control. Blood will spill in places you can't clean." Rain ran down her face like tears, but her eyes were dry. Sure. Focused. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment. In that moment, Isabella saw it again, the small reaction he had tried to hide at the restaurant. The dislike. The discomfort. The way he seemed tired of his father's cruelty. It didn't make him safe, but it made him complicated. "What truth?" Lorenzo asked quietly. Isabella's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her mind raced through old rules. Rule 1. Never say your real name. Rule 2. Never confirm what they fear. Rule 3. If you must speak, speak in half-truths. She leaned closer, lowering her voice even more. "The truth is this," she said. "You saw a waitress tonight. But your father saw something else. You recognized something. And now he's going to want to know why." Lorenzo's eyes sharpened. Recognized what? Isabella's mouth pressed into a tight line. She could see the trap forming. If she answered wrong, she gave him the whole story. If she stayed silent, he might take her back. So she changed the direction. She looked him straight in the eye and said the most dangerous thing she could say without revealing her name. "I know exactly who you are," Isabella said. "I know what your family is. I know what your father has done. And I know this. If he learns the truth about me, he won't just kill me." She took a slow breath. "He'll destroy this city to erase the shame." Lorenzo's face shifted, shock, anger, disbelief. "You're speaking like you've known us for years," he said. "I have," Isabella whispered before she could stop herself. The second the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Because Lorenzo heard it too. He stepped forward, eyes locked onto her. "Then you're not just a waitress." Isabella's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She could feel the moment cracking open. If she stayed, the conversation would turn into a capture. So she moved. Not running wildly this time. Running smart. Isabella shoved past him suddenly, shoulder brushing his chest. Lorenzo reached out instinctively, but she twisted away, slipping like smoke through his grasp. "Wait," he barked. Isabella sprinted down the street, cutting through a gap between two cars, vanishing into a crowd under a lit awning. Lorenzo chased, but she was already changing direction, blending, disappearing. She was what she had always been. A ghost. When Lorenzo finally stopped, breath heavy, rain dripping from his hair, she was gone. He stood there for a long moment, staring into the moving crowd like he could force her to appear. Then his jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, keeping his voice low. "Lock down quietly," he said into the call. "No sirens. No noise. I want this clean." Pause. "Yes," he added. "Find her employee records. Now." He listened, eyes still scanning the city. Then his expression changed. The man on the other end had told him something that made his blood run cold. Lorenzo's voice dropped to a hard whisper. "What do you mean the address is fake?" Another pause. His grip tightened on the phone. "And her social security number?" he asked. Silence. Then the answer. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "She's a ghost," he murmured almost to himself. He lowered the phone slowly, rainwater sliding down his knuckles. A waitress with no real identity. A girl who spoke his father's secret dialect like she was born to it. A nobody who ran like she had been trained. Lorenzo stared into the night. Then he made a decision. "Find her," he said again, voice firm. "And no one tells my father until I say so." He ended the call, put the phone away, and stood still as the city moved around him. For the first time in a long time, Lorenzo De Luca felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Not anger. Intrigue. Because the girl who poured the water wasn't just hiding from the De Lucas. She was hiding something that could destroy them. And Lorenzo needed to know what it was. Rain followed Isabella like a shadow. By the time she reached Harbor Point, her hair was heavy and damp against her neck, and her uniform clung to her skin like a second layer of fear. The city behind her was still loud, still bright, still pretending nothing had happened. But Isabella's world had narrowed into one goal and one rule. Don't go home. Home was a trap. Home was predictable. Home was where they would look first. So she moved the way she had been taught, quiet, careful, never in straight lines. She crossed streets without using the same corners twice. She walked past subway entrances but didn't go down. She cut through a crowded bodega, exited through a side door, and came out on a different block. She let the city swallow her, then she slipped out of its mouth. Harbor Point sat near the water, far from the clean glass buildings and polished sidewalks of Manhattan. Out here, everything smelled like metal, salt, and old oil. The wind off the water was sharp and wet, and the docks looked like they had been forgotten by time. Rusted shipping containers stood like giant coffins. Cranes rose into the night like skeletal arms. And the water, dark, restless water, slapped against the pilings as if it wanted to drag secrets down with it. Isabella limped slightly. Not from injury but from exhaustion. Her calves ached. Her lungs still burned from the run. And inside her chest, a deeper pain sat like a stone. She had broken her own rules. She had spoken. Now the past wasn't just chasing her. It was catching up. At the edge of Pier 42 stood a bait shop that looked abandoned. Its windows were boarded up. A faded sign hung crooked, barely readable through the rain. The place looked like a lie told badly. But Isabella knew better. She stepped onto the rotten wooden boards, ignoring the way they creaked beneath her. Her hands were shaking again, but she forced them still. She stood at the door and knocked in the only rhythm that mattered. 2 fast. 1 slow. 3 fast. Tap tap. Tap. Tap tap tap. Silence. A long heavy pause followed. Isabella didn't move. She didn't fidget. She waited the way a soldier waits when a gun is pointed at her head and she's hoping the person behind the trigger still remembers her name. Finally the door cracked open. A barrel of a shotgun appeared first. Then a pair of tired eyes. "We're closed," the voice rasped. Isabella swallowed. Her lips were cold. She leaned forward slightly and spoke in a flat, quiet tone. "The tide is high." The shotgun didn't move. Isabella's eyes didn't blink. "But the fish aren't biting," she finished. The barrel lowered instantly. The door opened wider. A man stood there, tall but bent with age, his arms thick and scarred under a stained tank top. His hair was gray and close-cropped, and his face looked like it had survived too many winters. His eyes were sharp. They widened now as he stared at her. "Isabella," he whispered like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it. She stepped inside quickly and the door slammed behind her. Locks clicked. 1, 2, 3. The air inside smelled like old wood, fish, and cheap alcohol. Lobster traps were stacked in a corner. A dead radio sat on the counter. The room was dim, lit only by a hanging bulb that flickered like it was afraid of being seen. The man lowered the shotgun completely and stared at her as if she might vanish. "You're soaked," he said. "Why are you here?" Isabella's breath shook as she spoke. "They saw me." His jaw tightened. "Who?" "You know who," Isabella said, voice low. "The DeLucas." The man's face went pale. He moved closer, but not too close, like he didn't want to scare her. "That's impossible." "It's not," Isabella said. She leaned against the counter, her knees suddenly weak. "Don Antonio is here." The words landed like a punch. The old man blinked slowly, like his mind was replaying the sentence to check if it was real. "Don Antonio?" he murmured. "In New York." Isabella nodded. The man's hand went to his chest as if he needed to steady his heart. "How?" "I saw him," Isabella said. Her voice tightened. "He walked into La Vetra like he owned the air. And she stopped herself, swallowing the panic back down. "I made a mistake." The man stared at her harder. "What kind of mistake?" Isabella's eyes flashed. He spoke in the old dialect. The man's face changed instantly. He knew what that meant. "Why would he speak that in public?" he asked, voice rough. "He was testing the help," Isabella replied, laughing. "Talking about me like I was nothing." Her hands clenched. "And I answered him." The man's breath left him. "You answered?" he repeated, almost angry. "In that dialect?" Isabella didn't reply because her silence was enough. He cursed under his breath in Italian and ran a hand over his face. "Madonna," he whispered. "You spoke to the devil in his own tongue." Isabella's shoulders rose and fell in a shaky breath. "I didn't come for advice, Matteo. I came for what my father left." The name hung in the air like smoke. Matteo Russo. He had once been one of the most feared men on the docks, not because he was loud but because he was loyal. The kind of loyalty that didn't break even when the world burned. He stared at her for a long moment. "You were supposed to stay hidden," Matteo said. "You were supposed to stay safe." "I was safe," Isabella whispered. "Until tonight." Matteo stepped back, his eyes filled with something like regret. "You look like him," he said quietly. Isabella didn't ask who. She already knew. "Ricardo," Matteo murmured. "Your father." Her throat tightened and pain flashed through her eyes. For a second she was not 20-something in a wet waitress uniform. For a second she was 12 again. Small hands, smoke in her lungs, screams in her ears. Matteo saw it and lowered his voice. "I kept my promise," he said. "I got you out." Isabella nodded once, tightly. "In a rug. On a fishing boat." Matteo's face twisted. "You remember?" "I remember everything," Isabella said. "The fire. The water. The men shouting. You covering my mouth so I wouldn't scream." Matteo's jaw clenched. "That night wasn't supposed to happen." "It happened anyway," Isabella replied, bitterness sharpening her words. "My father trusted people. He believed in honor. And they burned us for it." Matteo looked away, shame flickering across his features. "I tried," he said. "I tried to reach him." Isabella's eyes hardened. "You didn't." Matteo flinched as if slapped, then nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I didn't." Silence filled the room. Rain tapped against the boarded windows like impatient fingers. Isabella straightened, forcing herself back into control. "I need the package," she said. Matteo's eyes narrowed. "No." Isabella's gaze didn't soften. "Yes." Matteo took a step closer. "If you open that, there is no going back. You stop being a ghost, Isabella. You become a target." "I already am," she said simply. "Don Antonio is looking for me." Matteo's hand tightened on the shotgun. "Then you run. You disappear again." Isabella shook her head. "I can't. Not this time." Matteo stared at her, then whispered, almost pleading, "Why?" Isabella's answer came out cold. "Because hiding didn't save my family." Matteo closed his eyes. He looked tired in a way that age alone couldn't explain. He sighed deeply, like a man giving up the last piece of peace he had. "Follow me," he said. He moved behind the counter and pried up a loose floorboard. From beneath, he pulled out a heavy steel case wrapped in oilcloth. Even through the wrapping, it looked expensive. Dangerous. He placed it on the counter with both hands, like it carried weight beyond metal. Isabella stared at it, her fingers hovering over the cold surface. What is it? She asked softly, though she already knew. Matteo's voice was grim. Your father's last weapon. Isabella unwrapped it slowly. The steel gleamed faintly in the dim light. It had secure locks and heavy hinges, built to survive fire and water. Matteo spoke the name like a warning. Il Cadice Cremisi. Isabella swallowed. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. Matteo leaned closer. Inside is proof. Names. Deals. Betrayals. Everything that killed your family. His eyes darkened. And everything that can kill others. Isabella's fingers tightened around the handle. Good, she whispered. Matteo's face softened just for a moment. Isabella, if you take this, they will never stop. They already never stopped, she replied. She turned slightly as if she could already hear footsteps outside. And then, crash. Glass shattered above them. The skylight exploded inward, raining shards like glittering knives. Matteo spun, raising his shotgun. Ropes dropped. Dark shapes followed. Men in tactical gear, faces hidden, guns fitted with suppressors. Their movements were too clean, too sharp, too practiced. Not street soldiers. Professionals. Matteo fired. Boom. One of the attackers fell back with a grunt. But then red dots appeared, 3 laser sights, aiming at Matteo's chest. Isabella's blood turned to ice. Matteo, she screamed. He looked at her just once. His eyes were calm. And in that calm, Isabella understood something painful. He had always known this might be how it ended. The suppressed shots came fast. The Matteo jerked, staggered, and fell backward against the counter. His shotgun slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a heavy clatter. No! Isabella cried, lunging forward. Bullets chewed into the wood beside her. She dropped instantly, grabbing the steel briefcase as she rolled to the side. Instinct took over. No tears. No hesitation. Survival first. Isabella crawled behind a heavy freezer, breath ragged, clutching the case to her chest. The attackers moved in, boots pounding the floorboards. Isabella kicked the freezer door open, using it as a shield, and bolted for the back exit. Bullets sparked off metal. The door burst open. Rain hit her like a wall. She ran onto the pier, the wind howling, the water roaring beneath her. She didn't look back at Matteo's body. If she did, she would fall apart, and falling apart was death. She sprinted toward the darkness with Il Cadice Cremisi in her grip, the steel handle cutting into her palm. Somewhere behind her, voices shouted. Footsteps chased. But Isabella kept running, because now she wasn't just running from death. She was running with the truth. The pier was chaos. Rain hammered the wooden boards of Pier 42, turning them slick and treacherous. Wind howled off the water, carrying the smell of salt and oil. Isabella burst out of the bait shop's back door, the steel briefcase clenched tight in her hand, her shoes slipping as she ran toward the open edge of the dock. She could hear them behind her. Boots. Shouts. The sharp, controlled movement of men who knew exactly how to kill. Her lungs burned. Her arms ached. But she didn't slow down. Then a voice cut through the storm. Isabella. She skidded to a stop. Standing between her and the end of the pier was Lorenzo De Luca. He was alone. No guards. No backup. His suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his expression tight with urgency. For half a second, Isabella thought the universe was mocking her. You followed me, she snapped, backing away, lifting the briefcase defensively. I didn't bring them, Lorenzo shouted, stepping forward with his hands raised. I came alone. Behind Isabella, shadows poured out of the bait shop. Men in tactical gear. Helmets. Masks. Suppressed rifles raised in perfect formation. Isabella's blood ran cold. Those weren't De Luca soldiers. They moved too clean. Too quiet. Too professional. Red laser dots appeared, one on her chest, one on Lorenzo's shoulder, another on the boards between them. Drop the case. A voice barked through the storm. Both of you. Lorenzo turned slowly, eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the men. They're aiming at you too, Isabella said sharply. I noticed, Lorenzo replied grimly. The lead mercenary stepped forward. Orders are simple. Clean slate. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. That wasn't my father's voice. Isabella's mind raced. If Don Antonio wanted her dead, he wouldn't send strangers. He would come himself. He would want to see her face. He would want to hear her last words. These men wanted efficiency. Someone sold us out, Isabella hissed. Another mercenary shifted his rifle. Last warning. Isabella didn't think. She acted. Her fingers slipped into the deep pocket of her apron. The same apron she had never taken off since leaving the restaurant. Her hand closed around cold metal. The flashbang. She had grabbed it without knowing why when the first attacker fell inside the bait shop. Habit. Instinct. Training that never fully left her. Isabella yanked the pin and shouted, "Down!" She hurled the flashbang straight over Lorenzo's head. The explosion was blinding. Light tore through the storm. Sound cracked the air like a broken sky. The mercenary staggered, shouting, weapons firing wildly. Lorenzo dropped instantly, shielding his face. "Move!" Isabella screamed. She grabbed Lorenzo by the lapel of his soaked suit and shoved him hard toward the edge of the pier. "What are you doing?" he yelled. "Saving you," she snapped. "So I can decide what to do with you later." She pushed him. Lorenzo went over the edge, disappearing into the dark water with a heavy splash. Isabella didn't hesitate. She leapt after him. The river swallowed them whole. Cold slammed into Isabella's body like a wall. The shock stole her breath, burned her skin, and sent pain screaming through her muscles. The water was thick and filthy, reeking of fuel and rot. She kicked hard, forcing herself deeper instead of up. Bullets ripped into the surface above them, punching holes through rain and water alike. Lorenzo surfaced briefly, gasping, coughing, panic flashing across his face as he flailed for air. "Quiet!" Isabella hissed, grabbing his sleeve and dragging him under again. They sank beneath the pier, into darkness broken only by thin lines of light slipping through the gaps between the boards above. The underside of the pier was a forest of thick wooden pilings, coated in slime and barnacles. Isabella wrapped one arm around a post, anchoring herself as the current tugged at her. She could hear voices overhead. "Thermal drone," someone shouted. Lorenzo's eyes widened. Isabella shook her head sharply and pointed. She pushed off, swimming low and slow, pulling Lorenzo with her. Her movements were controlled, silent, practiced. She didn't splash. She didn't rush. Lorenzo struggled to keep up, his muscles stiff from the cold, his breath shallow and panicked. They reached a rusted ladder bolted into the pier structure, half hidden behind a piling. Isabella climbed first, hauling herself up with gritted teeth. She reached down and grabbed Lorenzo's wrist, pulling him up after her. They slipped into a narrow storm drain opening just as a beam of light swept across the water where they had been moments before. Inside the tunnel it was dark and damp. Water dripped from the ceiling. The smell of earth and rust filled the air. Isabella collapsed against the concrete wall, chest heaving. Lorenzo leaned forward, hands on his knees, coughing violently. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Lorenzo looked up at her, water dripping from his hair and jaw. "They tried to kill me," he said slowly. Isabella nodded. "I told you." "My father wouldn't do that," Lorenzo continued, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Not like that." "Exactly," Isabella said. She wiped rainwater from her face with the back of her hand. "Your father wants control, not chaos." Lorenzo pushed himself upright, pacing the narrow space. "Someone knew I was coming here. Someone knew where you were." Isabella's grip tightened on the briefcase. "That means someone inside your family." Lorenzo stopped pacing. The words hung heavy between them. "My father's circle is small," he said. "Very small." "Then the list of suspects is short," Isabella replied. Lorenzo ran a hand through his hair, anger and confusion battling on his face. "This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. For both of us," Isabella said. Silence followed. Water dripped. Somewhere far above, the storm continued. Lorenzo looked at her fully now, really seeing her. Not the trembling waitress, not the ghost who ran, but the woman who had just dragged him out of a death trap. "You knew how to move under the pier," he said quietly. "You knew where the ladder was." Isabella didn't deny it. "You've been trained," Lorenzo continued. "Or raised in it." "Both," she said. He studied her. "Then tell me who ordered this." Isabella hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There's only one man in your father's inner circle with the reach, the money, and the hunger for power to do this without permission." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Say his name." "Vittorio Bianchi," Isabella said. The name landed like a stone. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. "My father's consigliere." "The same man who laughed when your father insulted me," Isabella added. "The same man who watched and said nothing when your father tested the room." Lorenzo exhaled slowly. "Vittorio has been with us since before I was born." "That means he remembers the old days," Isabella replied. "And men who remember power often want it back." Lorenzo leaned against the wall, closing his eyes briefly. "If Vittorio ordered this," he said, "then my father isn't safe either." Isabella met his gaze. No. He's not. They stood there, two enemies bound by the same threat, listening to the echo of their own breathing. What do we do now? Lorenzo asked. Isabella looked down at the steel briefcase, then back at him. Right now, she said. We survive the night. Lorenzo nodded slowly. And after that? After that, Isabella replied, we decide who gets buried. Lorenzo held her gaze for a long moment, then extended his hand, not as a boss, not as a prince, but as a man asking for trust he did not deserve. A truce, he said. Temporary. Isabella looked at his hand. She didn't take it. I don't trust DeLucas, she said. But I won't kill you today. Lorenzo gave a short, breathless laugh. I'll take that. He straightened. I have a place. Off the books. No one knows about it. Isabella hesitated, then nodded once. Lead the way, she said. And if this is a trap? It's not, Lorenzo said quickly. Not this time. They moved deeper into the tunnel together, footsteps echoing softly. Above them the river raged. Below the city, two enemies walked side by side, no longer hunter and prey but something far more dangerous. Allies born in water. The city above them felt like another world. Isabella and Lorenzo came out of the storm drain through a hidden exit behind a row of dumpsters, several blocks away from the river. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle, but the cold stayed in their bones. Isabella's hair was damp and heavy, her clothes clinging to her skin. Lorenzo looked worse. His suit was ruined, his shoes soaked, his face pale from the icy water. Neither of them spoke much as they moved. They walked fast, keeping to the shadows, avoiding busy streets. Lorenzo led with the confidence of a man who knew every corner of Manhattan. But tonight his confidence had cracks. Isabella could see it in the way he kept glancing behind them, in the way his jaw stayed tight, in the way his hand kept drifting near his waistband as if he expected a gun to appear there by memory. They finally turned onto a quiet street lined with old buildings and darkened storefronts. A faint glow leaked from street lamps reflecting off wet asphalt. Lorenzo stopped in front of a wide metal door set into a brick building. This is it, he said. Isabella stared at the door. No sign. No camera that she could see. No doorman. Nothing that said safe. You're sure no one knows about this? She asked. Lorenzo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key fob. No one, he said firmly. Not even my father. He pressed a code into a keypad hidden beside the doorframe. A soft click sounded. The metal door unlocked. He pushed it open. Warm air rushed out, smelling faintly of paint and something earthy, like wood and oil and old paper. Isabella stepped inside cautiously, her hand tightening on the steel briefcase. The place was nothing like she expected. She thought it would be a bunker, bare walls, weapons, surveillance screens, beds on the floor. The kind of hideout men like Lorenzo used when they needed to disappear. Instead she saw a loft. A huge open space with high ceilings and tall windows covered by thick blinds. Soft light glowed from lamps in the corners. Canvas paintings leaned against the walls, some finished, some half-painted, some messy with wild strokes of color. The air was not thick with gunpowder. It was thick with ghosts. Isabella took a slow step forward. The paintings were intense, violent swirls of red and black, faces half-formed, hands reaching out as if trying to escape the canvas. One painting showed a man's silhouette standing over another figure on the ground. Another showed a woman's eyes, wide and hollow, as if she had seen too much and survived anyway. Isabella's throat tightened. You paint? She whispered. Lorenzo shut the heavy metal door behind them and locked it. Then he turned on another deadbolt. Yeah, he said, almost annoyed like he didn't want to admit it. I paint. Isabella stared at him. Why? Lorenzo shrugged, walking toward a small kitchenette at the far end. It quiets my head. Isabella's eyes returned to the canvases. These weren't hobby paintings. These weren't casual. They looked like someone had poured his nightmares onto fabric because he couldn't hold them inside anymore. Lorenzo opened a cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit. Sit, he ordered. Isabella hesitated. Her pride fought her for a moment. Then her leg throbbed, sharp and hot, reminding her that stubbornness didn't stop blood. She lowered herself onto a clean white sofa, still holding the briefcase like it was part of her body. Lorenzo knelt in front of her. The movement was strange, this powerful man dropping to his knees in front of a woman who had been his enemy hours ago. Let me see, he said. Isabella's voice was flat. It's nothing. It's bleeding through your uniform, Lorenzo replied. She glanced down. He was right. Dark red stains were spreading along her calf where the fabric had torn on the pier. She hadn't even noticed how much it hurt until now. Lorenzo pulled out medical scissors. Isabella stiffened. Don't. Lorenzo looked up. Do you want it infected? She held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. Fine, she muttered. Lorenzo carefully cut the wet fabric away. His hands were steady and gentle, which didn't match his reputation. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic. Isabella flinched slightly. That stings, she said. Lorenzo's mouth twitched. You're human. Isabella shot him a sharp look. Don't get comfortable. Lorenzo didn't respond. He wrapped the bandage neatly, tight enough to hold but not tight enough to hurt. You've done this before, Isabella said quietly, watching him. Lorenzo paused. A lot. The simple answer carried weight. Isabella could hear what he didn't say. A man like Lorenzo didn't learn first aid from a safety class. He learned it because he had to keep people alive. Or because he had to keep himself alive. He finished and sat back on his heels. For a moment their eyes met. There was something tense in the air, not just danger. Not just suspicion. Something else. Something that made both of them look away too fast. Lorenzo stood and walked to a small bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of something amber from a bottle. I don't drink, Isabella said. Lorenzo held out the glass anyway. You're shaking. Isabella wanted to refuse. But her hands were trembling. Not from fear now, her body was reacting to everything. Cold water, running, adrenaline, grief. She took the glass and sipped. It burned her throat. She hated that it helped. Lorenzo leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. You're not what you pretend to be, he said. Isabella gave a cold laugh. And you are. Lorenzo's face darkened. I'm exactly what I pretend to be. Isabella studied him. His clothes were expensive, but tonight they looked like a costume that had been dragged through mud. His eyes were tired in a way money couldn't fix. His posture carried violence, but his hands had just wrapped her wound like he was afraid to hurt her. You flinched, Isabella said suddenly. Lorenzo blinked. What? At the restaurant, Isabella said. When your father spoke. You didn't like it. You hated it. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I'm used to it. That doesn't mean you accept it, Isabella replied. Silence grew between them. Lorenzo finally spoke, voice low. Why didn't you kill him? Isabella's grip tightened on the glass. Who? My father, Lorenzo said. You had months. You had access. You served him wine. You were close enough tonight to poison him, to cut his throat, to do anything. Isabella stared at the floor for a long moment, then looked up. Because death is too easy, she said. Lorenzo didn't speak. Isabella continued, voice calm but edged with something sharp. If I kill him fast, he dies a legend. He dies as the feared Don Antonio. The old lion who never fell. Her eyes narrowed. I don't want him to die proud. Lorenzo's face stiffened. Then what do you want? Isabella set her glass down slowly. I want him to live long enough to watch everything he built collapse, she said. I want him to see his empire turn to dust. I want him to understand that he didn't win. Lorenzo stared at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. That's your plan, he said quietly. Revenge through ruin. Isabella nodded. I didn't survive to become his mercy. I survived to become his punishment. Lorenzo looked away, his throat working as if he wanted to argue but couldn't. Because part of him understood. Because part of him was tired too. We didn't choose our fathers, Isabella said softly. But we cleaned their blood. Lorenzo's eyes flashed back to her. Raw, unguarded. You don't know what it's like. Isabella's voice didn't rise. I do. She gestured toward the paintings. That's what it's like. Lorenzo went still. Then he walked closer, stopping near the sofa. The air shifted again. Closer. Sharper. He reached out, his fingers brushing Isabella's cheek, wiping away water that might have been rain or might have been something else. Isabella didn't pull away. Her breath caught. For 1 second, the world outside, guns, mercenaries, betrayal, felt far. If we survive this, Lorenzo said quietly, I'm done. I leave. I take whatever money I can and disappear. Isabella's eyes softened for a fraction of a moment. There is no disappearing, she whispered. Not for people like us. She glanced toward the briefcase. A sudden thought struck her like ice. Lorenzo, she said sharply. He blinked. What? The handle, Isabella said, standing up too quickly. Pain shot through her leg. She ignored it. Touch it. Lorenzo frowned, then reached for the briefcase handle. His expression changed instantly. It's warm, he said. Isabella's stomach dropped. It shouldn't be. Lorenzo flipped the case over fast, running his fingers along the metal edge. His eyes narrowed. Then he saw it. A tiny red dot, no bigger than a pinhead, pulsing faintly near the hinge. Lorenzo's face went pale. Tracker. Isabella's blood went cold. How long has that been there? Lorenzo checked his watch, his mind racing. If they tagged us at the pier, he murmured, voice tight. They're not far behind. Isabella grabbed the briefcase as if she could hide it by holding it tighter. Lorenzo moved quickly, scanning the loft, locking the blinds fully, checking corners like a man preparing for war. We have seconds, he said. Isabella's heart pounded. She grabbed the first thing she could, her pocket knife, then froze as a sharp cracking sound echoed above them. Crack. The skylight shattered. Glass rained down. And ropes dropped from the ceiling, just like the bait shop. History was repeating itself. Only this time, Isabella wasn't alone. And the ghosts in this studio were about to wake up. The loft filled with smoke and falling glass. Isabella hit the floor as shards rained down from the shattered skylight, her hands covering her head by instinct. The sound was deafening, metal cracking, glass breaking, boots landing hard on concrete. Ropes swung through the air and dark shapes followed them down. Men in tactical gear dropped into the studio with perfect coordination. This was no warning. This was an ending. Lorenzo moved fast. He shoved a heavy drafting table onto its side and dragged Isabella behind it just as the first shots rang out, bullets tearing into the wall where they had been standing seconds before. Stay down, he shouted. Isabella's heart hammered in her chest, but her mind stayed sharp. She pressed herself flat against the floor, clutching the steel briefcase to her body. Boots spread across the loft. Then a voice cut through the chaos, calm, familiar, and poisonous. Enough. The shooting stopped. Footsteps approached slowly, deliberately. A man stepped into view, removing his mask as he walked. Vittorio Bianchi. He looked composed, almost relaxed, in a dark suit that seemed untouched by the violence around him. His gray hair was neat, his face smooth, his eyes cold and calculating. Behind him, two men dragged someone forward. Isabella's breath caught. Don Antonio De Luca was thrown onto the floor near the center of the room. He stumbled, coughing, his cane clattering away across the concrete. He looked smaller than Isabella remembered, older, shaken but still alive. Papa! Lorenzo shouted, rising halfway before a rifle snapped toward his head. Vittorio raised a finger. Careful, Lorenzo. He smiled thinly. We wouldn't want this to end too quickly. Lorenzo froze, rage burning in his eyes. What are you doing, Vittorio? Vittorio sighed as if disappointed. Cleaning up, he said. The family has been rotting from the inside for years. Don Antonio pushed himself onto one knee, glaring up at him. You dare bring guns into my son's house? Your son's house. Vittorio chuckled. This place is a secret, Antonio. Only a handful of people knew about it. His gaze flicked to Lorenzo. And yet here I am. Silence fell heavy. Isabella slowly rose from behind the table, stepping into the open. Her legs screamed in pain, but she ignored it. Her eyes locked onto Vittorio. You sold us out, she said. Vittorio turned toward her, amused. You're sharper than you look. You ordered the hit at the pier, Isabella continued. You hired the mercenaries. You wanted both of us dead. Vittorio tilted his head. I wanted chaos. Dead heirs make room for new kings. Lorenzo clenched his fists. You tried to kill me. Vittorio nodded easily. Yes. Don Antonio's face twisted with fury. I made you, he rasped. You would be nothing without me. And now, Vittorio replied smoothly, you are nothing standing in my way. He gestured with his gun toward Isabella. The girl goes first. Give me the case. Isabella took a step forward. Lorenzo shouted, Don't. She ignored him. You want il codice cremisi, Isabella said. That's why you're here. Vittorio smiled wider. Smart girl. It has proof, Isabella continued. Proof of every deal, every betrayal, every cut you took from the De Luca syndicate while pretending to serve it. Vittorio's eyes flickered, just for a second. Don Antonio noticed. You stole from me? The old man whispered. Vittorio scoffed. I built my own future. You were too busy clinging to old rules. Isabella lifted the briefcase. You want the truth? Yes, Vittorio said sharply. Open it. Slowly, deliberately, Isabella knelt on the floor. The room was silent except for the rain tapping against the broken skylight. She spun the combination. The locks clicked. She opened the case. It was empty. Vittorio froze. What? He snapped. Isabella looked up at him, her expression calm. Almost pitying. There is no book, she said. Vittorio's face twisted in rage. You're lying. No, Isabella replied. I'm smarter than you. She stood, meeting his gaze without fear. The leverage isn't paper, she said. It's memory. It's names. It's knowing who betrayed who and when. She tapped her temple lightly. It's here. Vittorio raised his gun. Kill her. Before anyone could move. Bang. Vittorio stiffened. A red bloom spread across his chest. Shock filled his eyes as he looked down, then slowly turned. Don Antonio stood behind him, a small pistol shaking in his hand. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with fury. You stole from me, Don Antonio said, voice trembling. From my family. Vittorio staggered. I made you. Bang. The second shot dropped him to his knees. Vittorio collapsed face first onto the floor, blood spreading beneath him like spilled paint. Silence returned to the loft. The remaining gunmen hesitated, glancing at one another. Their leader was dead. The payment was gone. Leave, Lorenzo roared. Now. The mercenaries didn't argue. They backed away, scrambling for the exits, vanishing into the night. Don Antonio dropped the gun and leaned heavily against a pillar, breathing hard. Lorenzo rushed to him, gripping his shoulders. Papa. Don Antonio looked past him, at Isabella. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the old man nodded slowly. The blood ends here, he said. Isabella held his gaze, unflinching. The easel behind them stood splattered with red. And on the studio floor, a traitor lay dead by the hand of the man he betrayed. The loft was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Broken glass covered the floor. Rain slipped through the shattered skylight in thin silver lines. The body of Vittorio Bianchi lay still near the easel, his blood spreading slowly across the concrete like spilled paint. The mercenaries were gone. They had retreated without argument, without pride. Men who fought only for money and knew when the payment had died. Their footsteps faded into the night, leaving the studio empty except for 3 people and a lifetime of unresolved blood. Don Antonio De Luca stood near a pillar, breathing heavily, one hand pressed against his chest. The small pistol lay on the floor near his feet, forgotten. Lorenzo hovered close to him, ready to catch him if he fell. Papa, Lorenzo said quietly. Sit down. Don Antonio waved him off. I am not finished, he said. His voice was rough but firm. He straightened slowly and turned toward Isabella. Isabella stood near the drafting table, her posture calm despite the ache in her leg and the exhaustion pulling at her bones. The steel briefcase rested at her feet, closed now, silent. The old man studied her carefully. Not like a target. Not like a threat. Like a ghost that had stepped fully into the light. You have your father's eyes, Don Antonio said at last. Riccardo Virelli. The name landed heavily in the room. Isabella did not look away. Then you know who I am. Don Antonio nodded once. I do. Lorenzo stiffened. Papa. I know, Don Antonio interrupted. His gaze never left Isabella. I knew the moment you answered me in that dialect. He took a slow step forward, leaning on his cane. We burned the Virelli house, he said. There was no pride in his voice. Only fact. We believed the bloodline ended that night. You believed wrong, Isabella replied. Don Antonio studied her face again. You survived. I was taken, Isabella said. Hidden. Raised to disappear. The old man closed his eyes briefly. For 21 years, he said quietly, I thought the feud was finished. Isabella's voice hardened. It wasn't finished for me. Silence stretched between them. Lorenzo looked from his father to Isabella, tension tightening his shoulders. He expected shouting. Accusations. Violence. None came. Don Antonio exhaled slowly. You could have killed me tonight. Yes, Isabella said. You saved my son, he continued. Yes. And you exposed the traitor I trusted more than anyone. Yes. Don Antonio nodded again, as if each word confirmed something he had already decided. The debt is clear, he said. Blood was spilled. Blood answered. He straightened, gathering what remained of his authority. The feud ends here. Lorenzo looked sharply at him. Papa? Don Antonio raised a hand. Enough blood has been spilled by men who believed history owned them. He turned fully to Isabella. I offer a truce, he said. Not as a favor. As repayment. Isabella remained silent. The De Luca syndicate will consider the Virelli bloodline extinct, Don Antonio continued. No hunts. No vengeance. No whispered orders in dark rooms. Your name will not be spoken. Lorenzo's eyes widened slightly. Your life, Don Antonio added, will be your own. Isabella listened carefully. Is that all? She asked. Don Antonio's gaze sharpened. No. He reached into his coat and removed a heavy gold ring, the De Luca signet. He held it loosely in his palm. This symbol, he said, ends wars when used properly. He looked at Lorenzo, then back at Isabella. My son will lead, Don Antonio said. The old ways die with me. No more uncontrolled blood. No more chaos. Lorenzo inhaled sharply but said nothing. You will walk away, Don Antonio said to Isabella. No titles. No claims. No throne built on graves. Isabella studied the ring, then lifted her eyes. I don't want a throne, she said. That surprised him. I don't want your power, Isabella continued. I don't want your streets or your soldiers or your legacy. Don Antonio frowned slightly. Then what do you want? Isabella's answer was calm. Peace that I can control. Lorenzo watched her closely. I will not start a war for a name, Isabella said. I will not raise children to clean up the sins of men long dead. Don Antonio was silent. But, Isabella added, there are conditions. The old man nodded. Speak. Isabella stepped forward, her voice steady. No retaliation, she said. Not against me. Not against anyone who helped me survive. Don Antonio nodded once. No hidden orders, Isabella continued. No future attempts to erase what remains of my family's truth. Another nod. And your son, Isabella said, turning slightly toward Lorenzo, will not be punished for tonight. Lorenzo's breath caught. Don Antonio's jaw tightened, but only for a moment. Agreed, he said. Isabella held his gaze. Then the feud ends. Don Antonio placed the ring back into his pocket. So it does. For the first time since entering the loft, the old lion looked tired. Truly tired. You chose wisely, he said to Isabella. You could have become what you hate. I already lived with it, Isabella replied. I won't pass it on. Don Antonio turned to Lorenzo. See this, he said. This is strength. Lorenzo nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Isabella. The old man straightened his coat. The syndicate will stabilize, he said. Quietly. Vittorio's death will be explained as betrayal. And me? Isabella asked. Don Antonio looked at her for a long moment. You will disappear, he said. Isabella shook her head. No, she said softly. I will be seen. Lorenzo frowned. Seen? Yes, Isabella replied. Not as a target. Not as a ghost. But as a woman who chooses her life. Don Antonio studied her, then allowed a small, tired smile. Then be seen, he said. But choose your light carefully. The rain slowed. The loft felt less heavy. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened. The De Luca syndicate still stood, but changed. And Isabella Varelli stepped out of the shadows, not because she was forced to, but because she decided it was time. La Vetra reopened on a Thursday. That alone was enough to make people talk. The restaurant had been closed only a short while, officially for renovations, but everyone in Manhattan's quiet power circles knew better. Places like La Vetra did not close without reason. When they did, it meant something had shifted beneath the surface, something invisible, something dangerous. By the time the doors opened again, anticipation filled the street. Black cars lined the curb. Men in tailored suits and women draped in elegance stepped inside beneath the warm glow of the entrance lights. The air buzzed with whispers and curiosity, but no one dared ask questions out loud. Inside, everything looked the same. The marble floors gleamed. The chandeliers cast soft gold light. The tables were dressed perfectly, wine glasses aligned with careful precision. But the feeling in the room had changed. It was calmer, sharper, controlled. At table 1 on the mezzanine sat Lorenzo De Luca. He wasn't wearing his usual dark suit. Tonight, he wore a tuxedo, his tie slightly loose, his posture relaxed in a way few people had ever seen. He looked less like a prince guarding a throne and more like a man who had finally set something heavy down. Beside him sat Don Antonio De Luca. The old man looked thinner, weaker, but there was peace in his face. He sipped slowly from a glass of deep red wine, watching the room with quiet satisfaction. The place feels different, Don Antonio said gruffly. Lorenzo smiled faintly. That's because it is. Footsteps approached. Conversation softened without anyone quite realizing why. She walked onto the floor without a tray, without an apron, without fear. Isabella entered La Vetre like she belonged there. She wore a deep red dress that moved fluidly against her body, elegant without being loud. Her hair fell neatly over her shoulders, her posture straight, her presence undeniable. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She didn't lower her eyes. She was no longer invisible. Heads turned. Whispers followed her path. No one recognized her as the trembling waitress who once poured water with shaking hands. They saw only confidence. She stopped beside Lorenzo, resting her hand lightly on his shoulder. "Everything satisfactory this evening?" she asked, her tone calm, professional, and faintly amused. Lorenzo looked up at her, warmth flickering across his face. "Perfect," he said. Don Antonio studied her closely. "You walk differently now," he said. Isabella smiled slightly. "I don't need to disappear anymore." Don Antonio grunted. "Good." A server approached nervously, presenting bread and wine. Don Antonio tasted the wine, then frowned. "The bread is cold." Several nearby guests stiffened. Isabella leaned down toward him, her lips close to his ear, and spoke softly in the heavy Sicilian dialect, the same ancient cadence that once froze an entire room. "Eat the bread you are given, old wolf," she murmured, "or you will find yourself on a very strict diet." Don Antonio froze. Then he laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, booming laugh that echoed through the restaurant. Heads turned in shock. Lorenzo laughed with him, shaking his head. "She's terrifying," he said. Don Antonio wiped a tear from his eye. "Keep her," he told his son. "The city will behave better." Isabella straightened, her smile calm and unreadable. She didn't correct him. She didn't claim titles. She didn't need to. As the night unfolded, Isabella moved through the room with ease, greeting guests, exchanging polite words, offering smiles that carried weight. People listened when she spoke. They stepped aside when she passed. No one knew why. They only knew they should. At one point she stood beside Lorenzo near the railing, looking down at the dining floor. "You're being watched," Lorenzo said quietly. "I know," Isabella replied. "Does it bother you?" She considered it. "No." Lorenzo studied her. "You could have ruled from the shadows." Isabella met his gaze. "I did. And it nearly destroyed me." Lorenzo nodded. "And now?" "Now," she said softly, "I choose visibility." The evening passed without incident. No violence. No threats. No blood. That was the real victory. As the last guests began to leave, Don Antonio rose slowly from his chair, leaning on his cane. "You did not fire a gun," he said to Isabella. "Yet you won." Isabella looked at him calmly. "Guns end lives," she said. "Truth ends wars." Don Antonio nodded once. "Remember that." Outside the city glowed. La Vetre stood tall and unbroken. And Isabella, once a ghost, once a target, stood beside Lorenzo de Luca as an equal. Not a queen by inheritance. Not a ruler by force. But a woman who understood the most dangerous kind of power. The kind that waits. The kind that sees. The kind that knows exactly when to step into the light. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more interesting stories.